day, good night. Welcome to BOS, the Betting on Sports podcast. I'm Kev Laramie, and today we're breaking down the College Football National Championship game from a betting perspective. We're going to have a look at the updated betting lines today. The line moved a couple times, and of course, it has steadied itself. We're going to break down a few more player prop. We're going to look at the history between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. Look at the quarterbacks, the running back. Look at the history between these teams. And of course, we're going to break down the SEC championship that took place last month. The last time those two teams faced each other. It's going to be a great show. Thank you for joining us. The game is just a few hours away, and we're now ready to look at these games from a betting perspective. And welcome to BOS. I'm Kevin Laramie, and if you don't know me, of course, I am a sports statistician. You can follow me on Twitter right here, and you can find, of course, all my stats, data points, and of course, I'm a soccer expert. Also love college sports, college basketball, college football. This will be a different type of betting podcast, and I'm glad you are with me for this debut edition. And we're starting with a doozy, the biggest game of the year. Some say in college football, some say it's the biggest football game of the year, one of my favorite evening. And tonight, we're going to have Georgia and Alabama, a rematch of the SEC championship game that took place on December 4th. Let's have a look at the updated betting lines as of right now across different sports books. Of course, shop around to get the best lines possible. The spread is back at 3. After moving to 2.5 earlier today, the betting line is back at 3. For Georgia. Georgia is a 3 points favorite heading into this match, and we're having the money line move a little bit. There's value on the underdog on the roll Tide Express at 230. There's also the total that could be interesting. 53.5 has started the week at 52.5 and might move before game time. Look at your team totals also. Those are all important move and line movement that we can see in the next few hours, and we'll break down these betting lines later in the show when I give you my suggestions and my predictions in this one. But once again, welcome to Betting on Sports podcast. Kirby Smart and Nick Saban will face off, while their teams will face off later today. And it is not the first time they face each other. They faced each other 4 times since Kirby Smart took over in Georgia in 2016. Turned around that program, and they have faced each other a few times. Nick Saban may be the greatest football coach, maybe for sure the greatest college football coach ever, and we're going to break down the matchup. But let's start by looking at the career of Kirby Smart with Georgia. This is his 6th season as head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs. A record of 65 wins and 15 losses, 81% win percentage, 4 national championship as an assistant with Alabama as a defensive coordinator, and also different type of assistant, different position coach when he was under Nick Saban. A lot of history between those two coaches. It's his second presence in the college football playoffs. He has, of course, managed this game in 2018, January 8, 2018, when they lost to Alabama in the college football playoff final. This is not something that is very different for Kirby Smart. He is used to losing to Nick Saban, 0-4. We'll see if that continues later tonight. But Nick Saban, the greatest ever manager, football coach in my mind. A player manager, knows how to motivate his team. Always finding a way to have Alabama considered the underdog, if you believe that possible. It's his 15th season as a head coach of Alabama after he took over. After trying his hand in the NFL, did not work out with the Miami Dolphins. It never works out for the Miami Dolphins. Just ask Brian Flores, who was fired by the Dolphins management earlier today. His record with Alabama, 274 wins, 60 losses, 1 draw. There was 1 tie in his history in Alabama. 81% win percentage for the greatest of all time. 7 national championship. 6 of those were with Alabama. 1 was with LSU, with the Tigers in the 2000s. It's his 7th presence in the college football playoffs. This is not his first go around. He knows what to do, and we'll see later tonight how he does that. Let's have a look at the games that took place between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. At least the Bulldogs and the Roll Tide, the Crimson Tide, January 8, 2018, in that famous college football playoff final. It was an overtime loss for the Bulldogs. Alabama, which were ranked 4th that year, heading into the playoff as the last team qualifying for them, and winning against the Bulldogs in overtime by 3 points. Now we go later in the same year, in December, in the SEC Championship game on December 4th, 2018, Atlanta. Yes, at the Benz. Well, Alabama got the victory once again, 35 versus Georgia 28. Alabama was ranked the best team in the country at that point, and Georgia was 4th. No chance for the Bulldogs there. On October 17th, 2020, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama got a great victory against Georgia by the mark of 41-24. At that moment, Alabama was the 2nd team in the country. Georgia was ranked number 3rd, and Alabama got the best of them. And their latest game played against each other was on December 4th, 2021, in Atlanta last month. And Alabama, as their 3rd team ranked in the country at that point, got the win against Georgia, 41-24, in the SEC Championship final. And the SEC champions are the Crimson Tide. Alabama got the best of everyone in that game. And they played so well against Georgia. They had quite the spectacular game plan. And that will be, of course, a very different game plan. There was Bryce Young throwing the ball, hitting the targets. And then against Cincinnati, they had a totally different game plan. We'll look at Brian Robinson's stats against Cincinnati. We'll look at the breakdown of the comparison of the running backs too, because that's a big conversation point in this matchup. The quarterback. It's always about the quarterbacks. And in this one, I believe we have a clear advantage, and we'll look at their statistics in just a few minutes. But it is very interesting to see the line back to 3, and we'll see if it stays at 3 until game time. Right now, those are the odds. 52.5 depending to 53.5. It's moving up and down, and the lines are at 3 for the spread. We've talked about the quarterback, and that is Alabama's advantage in my mind. Nick Saban knows how to make their quarterback better. And this year, for the first time in their history, Alabama has a Heisman Trophy winner as their quarterback. Bryce Young, a few weeks ago, won the Heisman Trophy, being the first quarterback ever to win the Heisman for Alabama. A storied university that got their first MVP for their quarterback, which is fascinating. But in this matchup of quarterbacks, we can have a look. It is, to me, a fascinating matchup. And I do believe Bryce Young is the best of the two. We see their statistics this year. That's including the semifinal. Stetson Bennett versus Bryce Young. The quarterback for Georgia has a great career and a great story. And, you know, the emotional side goes with him. But my pragmatic statistician side goes with Bryce Young. And Bryce Young is so young and has such a future in front of him. Nobody's talking about Mac Jones, right? Mac Jones, former Alabama quarterback, who is now playing for the New England Patriots. Here are their numbers. Here are the numbers for Stetson Bennett. 168 completions, 261 attempts. 64.4 completion rate for 2,638 yards, 27 passing TDs for Stetson Bennett. But when Stetson Bennett gets moving, that's when Georgia has an advantage maybe. 283 yards this season, 1 rushing touchdowns, and 7 interceptions this year. 2 of those came against Georgia, against Alabama in the SEC Championship game for Georgia. Now let's look at Alabama. 331 completions, 490 attempts for Bryce Young, completion percentage of 67.6, over 4,500 yards for the Heisman winner, 46 touchdowns, that's a record. Rushing yards, that's only 43, it's not that much. Rushing TDs, though, 3. That's 3 times more than Stetson Bennett, and that could be the key today. We'll talk about my anytime TD choices for scorers later, a player prop that I love, and we'll talk about why Bryce Young has a lot of value there. Interceptions, very clear, but Bryce Young does not get intercepted against Georgia, and that might be the case. That could be the difference between the winner and loser today. In the Natty, it could be turnovers, interceptions especially, and we'll see if Stetson Bennett can keep the ball properly. Let's take a look at the running backs, because as much as we want to talk about Bulldogs defense, which is the best in the country, especially against the run and all that, I think the running back will be a bigger story today than they were the last time they faced each other. So let's have a look at the running backs. Of course, there's more than just James Cook and Brian Robinson, but those are the 2 names that are expected to produce the most for each today. 107 carries for Cook, 651 yards, 6.1 yards average, which is a bit better than Robinson at 5.1. Rushing TD 7, reception 25 for 269 receiving yards, 4 receiving TDs. I think that's going to be fascinating. No fumbles for either of these running backs this season, and that's a key. Ball protection is very good for both these teams, except on the quarterback. That's where there's a difference. So we'll see if that comes to play. If you find a good number on an interception for Stetson Bennett, I would take it. But if we're looking at the running back comparison, I do believe the advantage goes to Brian Robinson Jr. for experience and for motivational aspect. Having lost his job, and of course because of injuries, he's now prominent once again, and he had a heck of a game against Cincinnati, not to say a record-breaking game against the Bearcats in the semifinal of the College National Championships. If we look at his statistics against Cincinnati in the semifinal, 26 carries for Robinson Jr., 204 yards, 7.8 yards average per carry. Yeah, no touchdown, no reception, no yards, no receiving TDs, but no fumble. So that's a lot of zeros, you're going to tell me. But that's 204 yards. Georgia usually allows 80 yards or so per game, in the entire game, as a defense of rushing yards. That could be the key. And when we break down the player props that I like, we'll see if Robinson will go over or under his projected yard production. But the way he was playing against Cincinnati in the semifinal, if he plays this way against Georgia tonight, this could be a very different story. But the thing is Georgia is amazing against the run. So what game plan will Nick Saban use? In the SEC Championship, we looked at the stats. He used a very pass-heavy game plan, and they did beat Georgia that way. Georgia decided to make Bryce Young beat them by the pass, by the air, and he did. Will they do that again? That's a question. But in the semifinal against Cincinnati, very different approach by Nick Saban, who decided to run like Forrest Gump. Just run after run after run, and it did pay off. They won that game. It was not even close. It was a blowout. And this is why they're playing tonight against Georgia. And if they beat Georgia once again, Nick Saban will win his unprecedented 7th national championship title for Alabama, his 8th in the history that will probably never be achieved once again. So let's take a look at the updated betting lines, because yes, it is a very interesting aspect. The betting line keep moving. Here are the betting lines. It's at 3. The spread is 3. If you think Alabama gonna win outright, if you're that confident in Alabama, I even invite you to take him on the money line at 230. If you believe Georgia's gonna win, that number of 3 is not ideal. You would love the 2.5 because then you would winning by a field goal. At this point, if you don't know, if you win by a field goal with a line of -3, it's a push. You get your money back, but you ain't winning anything. If you can find 2.5, depending on where you shop around, maybe you can find 2.5. Maybe you'll find 3.5. I would not suggest 3.5. That 0.5 is crucial. If you think Alabama has a shot, you love that 0.5 and you love that 0.3. If you bet earlier today, you might have missed that 0.5. The line keeps changing. The fact that it went from 2.5 to 3 during today on Monday is because a lot of money, late bettors, are putting their money on Alabama. There's more money on Georgia, but there's more bets on Alabama. And that money is actually coming in right now as we speak. We'll see how these betting lines evolve in the rest of the time we have before kickoff. Because this could very well go to 3.5 if there's even more money on Alabama before the beginning of that game, and then maybe even a 4, and then it's maybe worth it to double down on your choice of backing Roll Tide. But which one makes sense? Well, that depends for you. Do you think the defense of the Bulldogs and their only loss of the season against of course, the Roll Tide against Alabama in the SEC Championship, if you think that's really what's going to happen once again, then don't. But if you think it's a one-off, it's an outlier, if you think the best defense in college football will have a good game once again, maybe taking the 3 is not a bad idea. Maybe you can even take 6.5 and have over twice your money at the end of the day. Those are all things that could be made interesting if you decide to back the favorite here. By the way, if you like our show, you can take a second and subscribe to our YouTube page. It means a whole lot if you enjoy this show. We're going to, in the foreseeable future, have this show involved in the day-to-day rotation of Sports Podcasting Network. And of course, this is our first venture into a betting-focused show. And we're starting with the biggest football game of the year. Now, when you talk about football games, you talk about player props. And there's a lot of choices for player props for this game, but there's two. There's 2 that I really like and I think have a high likelihood of coming to fruition later today during the game. So let's take a look at those ones. It's Stetson Bennett passing yard is over under, depending on where you do your wagering, is at 254.5 right now. I do believe that's a high number. You could have found it at 258 earlier this week. That would have been maybe a better number that you could have been maybe a bit more comfortable with. But 254.5 is still high to me. And it's higher than he got last time they played. No, actually he got 304 when they played against Alabama in the SEC Championship. But that's too high. Alabama, I believe, will have a great defensive game. And I think that's going to be an under number. So take the under for Stetson Bennett in his passing yards. That's my first player prop that I will suggest. My second one is Brian Robinson Jr. He did have 204 yards against Cincinnati, and that did inflate that number. When we look at Georgia, they barely give over 80 yards per game as a team of rushing. Do I believe Alabama as a team will get 80 yards rushing? Maybe not. And then 64 of those would be Brian Robinson? Yeah, I don't believe so. I don't take the over here. And if we know something about Nick Saban in games like this, he brings things that we don't expect. So you're not going to see the same thing you saw last week. You're not going to see Robinson run for 204 yards. You're not going to see that type of play by them. I don't believe so at all. So to me, it makes a big difference. Because when we look at these two teams, they might be close to each other. They might have what we call rivalry, familiarity, but there's also some big outliers and big numbers. Because if we look at the SEC Championship that took place on December 4th, 2021, and we look at all these numbers here, 41-24, by the way, for Alabama, 24 for down. Third down efficiency was a big factor in this one. No fourth down were necessary in this entire game for Alabama. That's a big factor. Alabama is able to do this, 0 fourth down against the best defense in the country. And that's why I believe tonight we could see a repeat. Maybe not the same way. It won't be just by the air. You'll see a bit of more rushing yards, but you won't get to 65. You won't get to 64. Go with the under for Brian Robinson. But look at these numbers. Turnovers could be a big key. 2 interceptions for Georgia on December 4th. You add 2 touchdowns, or at least, you add 2 possession scores, let's say 10 points, a touchdown, and a field goal. It's 41-34, and you're talking about a different type of game here. The QBR rating of Stetson Bennett was not that great in the SEC Championship. But look at Bryce Young. He had a QB rating of 98.1, 0 interception, 3 TDs, 421 yards, 26 of 44. That's fine. But it's a no turnovers. That's a big difference. And we'll see these numbers tonight, how it makes a big difference. Yards per pass. That's where you had a big difference. And if Alabama can get over 80 yards rushing at 109 against Georgia last time, then maybe Alabama can surprise the bookmakers and could get the best here. All right, let's go to another prop position bet that I love. And this one, of course, is called Anytime TD Scorer. You don't get a lot of value, but Jameson Williams, if you believe he's going to score, 1.80. You don't get all your money back, but you get, a decent odds. Where the odds, I think, are a bit undervalued is the quarterback. I do believe Stetson Bennett will find the end zone for Georgia. He usually does in these type of games. 475 the odds. It's worth it. Bryce Young, same. Pizza money on both. When I say pizza money, $10. You get almost 50, you get 55 back. Not bad investment. Stetson, Bryce Young, I do believe they will have a rushing TD today. Anytime TD scorer is a good way to have value in these types of games. And of course, if you are just brand new to this show, I'm Kevin Larme, and you can follow me on Twitter at KevLarme and all the different places you can find your favorite podcasts. We're going to have a short break. When we come back, we're going to look at our final predictions at the line. We'll look at, our tickets. Who's going to win? Who's going to take it all? We'll talk about that after this short break. And we're back. I'm Kevin Larme. Welcome to Betting on Sports Podcast. College Football National Championship will debut in just a few hours. And the betting lines have been updated. Here are your latest numbers if you're looking at putting some money on this one. This is the time to make a decision, to choose which way I'm going. And I have decided where I'm going to go. You saw my player proposition. Those are what I have in play. Anytime TD scorer, Stetson Bennett, Bryce Young, there's value there. I have some pizza money on that. Now, earlier this week, I had Alabama +3. I felt good. So good about Alabama +3 that when it went down to 2.5, I still got some more. But then it got back to +3, and I'm okay with my choice. That's my decision. That is my prediction. Roll Tide, once again, a 7th national championship title for Nick Saban. He has the number of Kirby Smart, and he also has the experience and the wherewithal to change his approach. Yes, it is hard to beat the same team twice. That's one of the cliches you hear in sports. But numbers don't lie. Georgia could have great numbers, but you gotta be able to do them. And I'll use one quote that might be a cliche, but is true. And it's in the words of Ric Flair. To be the man, you gotta beat the man. And until Georgia exercises their demons against Alabama, regardless if they have the best defense in the country, they don't have the best head managing their players. Nick Saban is living rent-free in Kirby Smart's head. And tonight, we will have the 5th edition of the Rolling Over the Bulldogs by the Crimson Tide. It won't even be that close. So take that 3. Take that money line even. Alabama will win its 7th national championship under Nick Saban tonight. Mark my words. Or don't. Let us know what you thought about today's show. You can comment in the section below. Let us know, what is your play tonight? What do you think is going to happen in the national championship game? Is it a good game? Is it a bad game? Is it a good play? Is it a bad play? What is your thoughts? Go Bulldogs or Roll Tide? You heard what I had to say. Now it's your turn to tell us what you think. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at KevLarame for myself, and you can find the podcast version anywhere you find your podcasts. In the next few days, we'll have more on Betting on Sports podcast. This is our debut edition, and welcome to this YouTube-focused and podcast-focused edition of Betting on Sports. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and as always, until next time, we do wish every single one of you good luck with your bet tonight. But as always, enjoy your sports. It's about the journey, and tonight, Alabama will have another great journey. But as always, until next time, have a great bet.